Hi, everyone. How are you? Good. There's my timer. Oh, some more people are trickling in. Hurry up. You're going to miss the best presentation. All right. I'm here to talk about scope, and not the mouthwash kind, okay? We're going to talk about scoping your next PCI DSS assessment, whether it's a self-assessment or a report on compliance. What I always liked and what I always struggled with and what kept me awake at night as a former PCI ISA was, where's all the cardholder data? And there were so many times that I would get emails that said it showed up here, and it showed up over there, and those were places that it was never supposed to be. So before you start your next DSS assessment, before you pass go or collect $200, you must begin with your scope. And if you don't have a firm grasp on your scope, completing a self-assessment, if you're a level 1 merchant, a report on compliance, it's next to impossible to do your assessment, because what are you trying to assess if you don't know what you have? Understanding and knowing your scope is where and how you begin to create and build and maintain a continuous PCI DSS compliance program. That's a little foreshadowing, folks, for version 4. If you haven't already jumped on the bandwagon of continuous compliance, the clock's ticking. You need to get on board. So this is one of my favorite poems. Has anybody read The Tao of Pooh by Benjamin Hoff? I've got best friends. I've got 2 best friends. All right, this is Pooh Bear from the book of The Tao of Pooh. How can you get very far if you don't know who you are? How can you do what you ought if you don't know what you've got? And if you don't know what you've got, and if you don't know which to do of all the things in front of you, then what you'll have when you are through is just a mess without a clue. So if you don't know your scope, you just have a mess. Of all the best that can come true, if you know what and which and who. And this is really important when it comes to your scope. So everybody remember this poem. And if you're an ISA, how many ISAs are in here? How many QSAs? Y'all need to print this poem out and give it to your merchants, give it to the people that you work with, because honestly, scope, if you don't know what you have, then you have just a mess without a clue. So how can you get very far if you don't know what's in scope? So we're going to do a quick recap of how the Security Council defines scope, and you'll find this in the DSS. Per the PCI DSS, security requirements apply to all system components included in or connected to the cardholder data environment. The cardholder data environment is comprised of people, processes, and technologies that store, process, and transmit cardholder data. People, process, and technologies. So many times. How many of you have been on an assessment where they forgot that people and processes were in scope? Right? We forget about people and processes. We're only thinking about the assets that you can get on a pen test. System components include network devices, servers, computing devices, and applications. Inside the definition of scope, and you can go read it when you have insomnia, but it lists all different types of system components that could be included in your scope. Furthermore, and what I like about this is that in their supplement guidance for scope and network segmentation, I like how they further define scope. If you have something in your cardholder data environment, regardless of what its function is, if it's in there, it's in scope. If it's inside that primary area where you have systems that store, process, and transmit, it's in scope, regardless of reason. And if it's in the connected to space, regardless of reason, It's in scope. How many of you have actually kicked technologies out of your cardholder data environment because it had absolutely nothing to do with the cardholder data environment? Me too. I said, get out. Or put FIM and logging and this and that on your system, and they said, no thanks. And oh, by the way, if you have a flat network, everything's in scope. Good luck. I don't want to work for you, ever. Understanding scope, it's fundamental to a successful PCI DSS compliance program. Now, I don't know why, even in my ISA training, they don't really spend a lot of time on scope. Nobody does. You kind of have to learn it and wing it as you go. I can remember when I first started in 2012 being handed 6 spreadsheets and said this was scope. Huh? Which one is true? Well, they're all true. No, they're not. Without knowing what your scope is and knowing how to effectively manage scope, you can kiss continuous compliance goodbye. Your report on compliance is going to be a disaster. And so will your self-assessment if you're honest. And I know everybody's honest. But this picture of that woman that you see up on the slides, I can remember looking like that about 10 years ago. So I have come up with 6 simple steps to manage your scope. The more you practice them, the easier they get. First one is to reduce scope whenever and wherever possible. Reducing scope will help save time, save money, and save effort. Examples of scope reduction: third-party hosted payment page, big proponent of that. Proper network segmentation. Now, this isn't a network segmentation presentation, but you need to go read the definition of network segmentation because it's all about isolating your cardholder data environment. Stop storing payment card data. I can't reiterate this enough, and people will come back at me and say, well, there's a legitimate business reason why they're storing it. Keep questioning it. Why? Why are you storing credit card data? If you stop storing credit card data, you can almost say goodbye to requirement 3. There's about 4 requirements that you'll have to prove the negative to, but the rest of it kind of go away. Other ways to de-scope: if you have call centers, DTMF, and I think there's a few vendors in the exhibitor hall that I think well, I shouldn't say that. There's a few vendors, check them out, that they offer call center solutions to de-scope your call centers. And just keep in mind, when you reduce the scope of a PCI DSS assessment, it doesn't reduce your responsibility or your legal contractual obligations to maintaining PCI DSS compliance. I can't tell you what happened when somebody told an old CIO of mine, well, we stopped storing credit card data, so the PCI DSS doesn't apply anymore. Yep, true story. Not true, too. It's not true, and I had to re-educate the CIO. And often a reduction in scope involves third-party PCI DSS service providers. And so you're going to have to look at requirements 12.8 through 12.8.5, and you're going to need to maintain a really good program for your third-party service providers. Step 2, follow the money. So you're going to follow the money trail. A good ISA, PCIP, and working in partnership with your QSA, you become detectives and you ask a lot of questions. But you need to identify all the people, processes, and technologies and physical locations that are in the direct path of processing, transmitting, or storing payment card data. You need to review all the cardholder data flows. And if you look in the executive summary in the reporting template, it's going to tell you all the things you need to look for in the cardholder data flow. You need to also talk to people in finance application development, security operations, network security, and anybody else that could be involved with the payment card flows to validate them. Is this right? And while you're talking to them, ask them about their processes. Now, this could take a while, depending on your environment. So once you've identified and documented everything in the direct path, take a few days off before you go to step 3. Take a vacation if you need to, because you need to keep following the money. So remember that the connected to systems are in scope for assessment. So you need to identify all the people, processes, and technologies that are connected to the systems that store, process, and transmit. These are the systems, the people, process, and technologies that provide security for the cardholder data environment, that are used to provide network segmentation for your cardholder data environment, or could impact the security of your cardholder data environment. And a lot of times people forget that they're third-party service providers, that maybe it's one of your vendors does all of your patching for a certain system that provides security. Well, guess what? They're in scope. And once you've identified and documented everything in the connected to path, again, take a few days off, take a long weekend, go on a yoga retreat, do something. Go to step 4. This is where the hard work is, but it pays off, because if you do this work up front, you're going to have repeatable processes. So once you've identified your scope, you must create formal processes to create and maintain the inventory of all your people, processes, and technologies. And this will also help future-proof you for version 4.0, because it's never been a requirement until version 4.0 to have some type of scope management. Per PCI DSS version 3.2.1, requirement 2.4, and in PCI version 4, requirement 12.5.1, you must maintain a list of hardware and software that's in use, and you must include a description of the function in use. And new in 4.0, 12.5.2, scope is documented and confirmed by the entity at least once every 12 months or upon significant change. Has anybody here really done a good definition of significant change? Right? There's ways to, not ways to get around it, but I will teach you an effective way to manage significant change, because nobody has a really good definition. In the PCI DSS version 3.2.1 reporting template, section 4.4, read it. It's the executive summary, and you must include the list of critical hardware and software, the type of device, vendor, make, model, name of the software product, version or release, and the role and functionality of this technology. In the version 4 reporting template, this is section 4.8, you need to have the type of system component, the total number of system components of that type, counting. You need to have the vendor, you need to have the product name and version, and you need to have the role and function. What I'm going to recommend to you is that the more information you maintain on your in-scope assets, the easier it is for you to maintain scope. I recommend that you have the prod date, the asset name, the IP address, the technology, the OS version, the technology system administrator or subject matter expert, so you know who to call when things go south, the location of the asset, and a decommission date. If it's been decommissioned, it's not in scope for assessment, but you need to maintain evidence for 3 years, right? So you want to have a decom date on there if the asset's been decommissioned. And any other specific asset tags that your organization uses, use that in your scope management process. Step 5, automate your formal processes. Tracking on spreadsheets is not sustainable. Because you email a spreadsheet to 10 people to say, could you validate? What are you going to get back? 10 copies. Okay? Have it in a central place where people can go in, make the changes that they need to, or whatever, and validate that this is what the asset. So you want to be able to automate that. Get it in a centralized location that people have access to. And then step 6, you want to be able to continuously validate your scope. This is future-proofing for the next version. Again, the clock's ticking. Make sure your processes for managing scope have periodic validation checkpoints, and this is what I recommend. Weekly. You want to have a weekly reconciliation of your physical assets. That's why having it automated is going to be helpful. Hardware and software that's used in the cardholder data environment, these change regularly. So hardware assets get upgraded, decommissioned, they move in, they move out. So I recommend a weekly reconciliation process. Monthly, you want to go on the hunt for unsupervised cardholder data. There's a lot of it running around. You'd be surprised. Quarterly, check in with the people that maintain the cardholder data flows and your network diagrams. Make sure everything is current. I know it's like a once or twice a year thing to check, but I recommend doing it quarterly. Also quarterly, the technologies. Well, your hardware and software will change a lot more frequently in and out of the environment. Your technologies may not change as much, but you will have upgrades to them, so check in on a quarterly basis. And then semi-annually, you want to have people, check in with your people, the department code, subject matter experts, control owners, your vendors, something like that, at least every 6 months. Semi-annual, you want to do a full scope review at least twice a year. The DSS in version 4 is saying at least once and significant change, but if you do it 30 days before a report on compliance, it's fresh. So you're going to walk through everything with your QSA. And then when you have that scope, they can pull the samples and you're off and running to do the assessment. And not only that, but you're going to collect a lot of evidence during the scope review that you can apply to the assessment. You want to do an interim scope review 6 months after your report on compliance or your self-assessment is done. And if you're periodically confirming scope elements, doing a full scope review should not be difficult, okay? So, I have a few questions before I wrap up. Have you reduced scope whenever and wherever possible? There should be a lot of yes, I have. Do you have processes in place to manage changes to your cardholder data environment, whether it's people, processes, or technologies? And do you know who your subject matter experts are and your control owners are? Do you know who to call when a control fails? And last question. If I asked you right now for your in-scope inventory, people, process, and technologies, how confident would you be in handing it to me by close of business today? Thank you. And if you have any questions about how to do a scope assessment, see me over in booth 4. I would love to chat. Thanks.